people perceive him to be not just boring, but sort of weak and cowardly, and only doing things that are potentially politically advantageous, so not standing for anything.
Graham Jones has been suspended pending investigation. He referred to Israel and used a swear word. You know, this was at the same meeting that Azhar Ali, who's also been suspended by the party, made some very inflammatory comments about Israel and their intentions to invade Gaza. I wonder how this will sit with voters. You've just heard Dennis McShane. I mean, he was campaigning in central London, so it's maybe a little bit isolated, but he was saying no one at all was mentioning any of these storylines. But how might they affect the polling around Labour? It's probably their worst week in quite some time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's certainly been a bad week. And actually, I think less necessarily for its electoral impact and more about what it says about the Labour operation and the sorts of mistakes they're capable of making. So I think Dennis is actually right. So actually a lot of things don't cut through with voters. You'd be surprised at what people don't hear about. And even the 28 billion at the time, I think that has started to cut through. But
that's the reversal in the green agenda
but it
investment.
took quite a lot of time. And with this, I would doubt whether it did really spread, although I do think if it does catch on, it will be because it exposes an existing weakness in Keir Starmer's brand, which is that people perceive him to be not just boring, but sort of weak and cowardly, and only doing things that are potentially politically advantageous, so not standing for anything. And I think the problem with this row and the problem with the 28 billion is that they both play into that same idea. So with 28 billion, it's like, oh, you know, he said one thing, he's going to do another just because it's politically advantageous at this time. And actually, this is quite similar, because it's saying, oh no, you took a really principled stand against anti-Semitism in the party. That's all very well. You kicked Jeremy Corbyn out of the party. Oh, but actually suddenly when it's one of your people, things aren't so clear. Suddenly it looks like he's playing politics and playing it badly. And I think that's what's going to look quite bad.
The green agenda is important to, particularly to younger voters. I wonder if they'll be turned off at all because of that reversal in plans. And looking at the anti-Semitism, I suppose one of the things that you could investigate is actually whether Keir Starmer has got as much of a handle on anti-Semitism within his party as he thinks he has, or whether he does need to respect Muslim voters more within his parties, who tend, you know, some of whom tend to be pro-Palestine. Is he trying to be too broad strokes with that?
So it is a difficult issue internally for the Labour Party. So far, he looked like he was doing a pretty good job of walking that line. But again, I think there's two issues here. Firstly, that issue of how he handles sort of conflicts in the Middle East within his party. I mean, people who are sort of on the left in this country care passionately about this issue. And that's something that he's going to have a problem with. His own MPs, in fact, care, you know, some of them care passionately about this issue. And that's one thing. But I think the other thing that he's got to sort of get his head around is not even just like how he tackles it inside, but how he communicates tackling it. And again, I think this undermines the sort of strong line that he was going at pains to show that he was taking.
Before we talk economics and the Conservative Party, let's definitely talk about the by-elections this week whilst we can. Wellingborough in Northamptonshire, Kingswood in Gloucestershire, both are Conservative seats. The by-election in Wellingborough taking place after former Conservative MP Peter Bones suspended from Parliament after being found to have bullied a member of staff, and the Kingswood by-election taking place because its MP Chris Skidmore resigned in protest against the government's plans to boost oil and gas drilling in the North Sea. What are the prospects?
Yeah, the prospects not looking good, and that actually shouldn't be the case. I mean, if you're to believe lots of journalists have gone, and if you read any of the reports coming out there, it seems like the Conservatives have sort of given up campaigning in both seats, which is not a great sign. A seat like Wellingborough, for example, they have big majority. It should be a Conservative safe seat. Labour need an 18-point swing to take it, so that's bigger than the swing in the national voting intention polls at the moment. But it is less than the swing that we saw Labour took seats like Selby last year. And so the fact that the Conservatives aren't even bothering to, or it seems like you hear, aren't even bothering to campaign, I think is quite telling. It feels like they've already written off the loss. Now, the big thing to watch out for in Wellingborough, as I'm sure you've already been talking about, is what happens with the reform vote. So last time we had by-elections, I'm thinking particularly of one Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire. Reform still weren't polling very well in the national polls. They were in sort of low single digits. I don't think they were ever really sort of breaching 5%. Now it's quite a different story. They've doubled their vote share. Most polls have increasing numbers of Conservative 2019 voters going to Reform instead. So it looks like it could be a real threat, but we haven't had an electoral test case for it yet.
Yes, and polling's different to
Polling is very
ballot box,
different.
basically.
There is one warning sign with that, though, which is that I think if you're trying to extrapolate a sort of by-election result in terms of how well Reform are doing, from the research we've done, Reform voters look quite a lot like lower propensity voters anyway, and turnout in by-elections can be so much lower, especially in the ones we've seen recently. So actually, Reform voters look like exactly the sort of voters that might not vote in by-elections anyway, but we will see. They might be angry for the government. It's interesting.
Plenty to look out for. Not got time to talk about the economics, but we'll discuss that anon anyway, or on and on. That'll dominate the next few days' agenda with inflation figures and GDP figures as well. Technical recession, could that be upon us as of Thursday?